Cubana de Aviación Flight 972 was a scheduled domestic flight from José Mart International Airport in Havana, Cuba, to Frank Paz Airport in Holgun, Cuba, operated by Mexican charter airline Global Air on behalf of Cubana de Aviación. The route's 39-year-old Boeing 737-201 Advance crashed shortly after takeoff on May 18, 2018, near Santiago de Las Vegas, 19 kilometers from Havana's city center. 112 people on board died, and one passenger survived with critical injuries. There were 4 survivors at first, but 3 of them died later at a local hospital. What happened? Let's try to figure it out. Cuban safety investigators investigated the incident with assistance from the United States and Mexico. While the FAA has no official jurisdiction in Cuba, their assistance was voluntary and welcomed by Cuban officials due to the general lack of experience with American-built aircraft among local investigators. Mexico, where the aircraft was registered, and the airline and flight crew who owned and operated the aircraft provided additional assistance. The multinational investigation concluded in September 2019 that the aircraft was outside its center of gravity, and the pilots could not resolve issues related to the plane's loading and weight imbalance. The aircraft was a leased Boeing 737-201 Advanced operated by Mexican charter airline Global Air on behalf of Cubana de Aviación on a scheduled domestic flight from Havana to Holgun. The plane was built in 1979, and after being owned by several airlines, it was purchased in July 2011 by Global Air, which began operating it for Cubana de Aviación in 2018. Global Air stated that its aircraft passed the November 2017 Mexican government inspection and had all the necessary permits to operate and lease aircraft. There were 107 passengers on board and an all-Mexican crew of 2 pilots and 4 flight attendants. The crew members were identified in a statement issued by Mexico's Secretariat of Communication and Transportation. Jorge Nuez Santos, 53, was the captain and logged 16,000 flight hours. Miguel Areola Ramirez, 40, was the first officer and had 2,000 flight hours. Flight 972 was on its way to Frank Paz Airport in Holgun, eastern Cuba. It carried a total of 113 people, including 107 passengers and 6 crew members. Except for 5 passengers, the entire flight crew comprised Mexicans. The plane crashed near the airport at 12:08 p.m. shortly after takeoff. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing one of the plane's engines on fire after the plane took an unusual turn after leaving the runway. The plane crashed into train tracks and a farm, and the wreckage caught fire. Nobody on the ground was injured. Firefighters and emergency medical crews rushed to the scene to assist with the rescue efforts. On May 25th, security camera footage of the accident from a nearby location was released, showing the aircraft's final moments before the crash. The crash killed all but 4 of the 113 people on board. However, 3 of the 4 survivors died later in the hospital. One of the passengers who survived the crash died 3 days later on May 21st, and another died on May 25th. The accident killed 112 people in total, including all crew members. The only survivor of the crash was a Cuban national. She had severe burns, memory loss, a cervical spinal injury that rendered her paraplegic, and amputation of her left lower leg, among other injuries and complications that necessitated extended hospitalization. In March 2019, she was released from the hospital for the first time. The president of Cuba's Church of the Nazarene confirmed that 10 church pastors and their spouses were among the passengers killed in the crash. Flight 972 is the 2nd deadliest aircraft accident in Cuba, trailing only the crash of Cubana de Aviación Flight 9046 in 1989, which killed 150 people. President Miguel Diaz-Canel announced the formation of a special commission to investigate the cause of the crash. The National Transportation Safety Board and the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States have both stated that they would be willing to help with the investigation if asked. Boeing stated that it's prepared to send a technical team to Cuba as permitted by U.S. law and at the direction of the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and Cuban authorities. On May 19th, Transport Minister Adel Izquierdo announced the recovery of the flight data recorder from the crash site. On May 24th, the cockpit voice recorder was discovered. Both were forwarded to the National Transportation Safety Board for investigation. On May 19th, the Mexican government announced that the National Civil Aviation Authority, DGAC, would begin an operational audit of Global Air to determine whether the airline was in compliance with regulations, and on May 21st, the Mexican authorities temporarily suspended Global Air's operations. Former employees and Cubana employees made allegations about Global Air's airworthiness, maintenance, and safety record in the days following the crash. Incidents involving the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority and the Chilean Directorate General of Civil Aviation have been reported. For example, in 2017, X-Ray Alpha-Uniform Hotel Zulu was barred from Guyanese airspace due to its crew overloading the plane with luggage and improperly stowing it. Ovidio Martinez Lopez, a pilot for Cubana for over 40 years before retiring in 2012, wrote on Facebook that a plane that Cubana rented from the Mexican company briefly dropped off radar over Santa Clara in 2010 or 2011, prompting an immediate response by Cuban aviation security officials. As a result, Cuban authorities suspended a captain and co-pilot for serious technical knowledge issues. Cuba's Aviation Security Authority formally recommended that Cubana cease renting planes and crews from Global Air, Martinez wrote. On July 17th, Global Air issued a statement saying that the cause of the accident had been determined as pilot error after international experts examined the aircraft flight recorders, explaining that the pilots had climbed at too fast a rate, causing the aircraft to stall. Mexico's Civil Aviation Authority said it would not lift a suspension of Global Air's operations, which the company was fighting, and that the Civil Aviation Institute of Cuba, which was leading the investigation, had yet to issue any findings. The Aviation Pilots Union Association of Mexico said Global Air was irresponsible in issuing its statement before the investigation was completed and did not consider factors such as weight distribution on the aircraft or potential equipment failures. ASPA spokesman Mauricio Aguilera said, "They're just looking to defend their interests." The Cuban Institute of Civil Aeronautics issued a statement on May 16, 2019, stating that the most likely cause of the accident was the actions of the crew and their errors in the calculations of weight and balance that resulted in loss of control of the plane and its fall during the takeoff phase. They claimed that the number of passengers in the forward cabin was given as 62 when it could only hold 54, and that the weight in the cargo compartment was incorrect. Calculations show that the fuel weight at takeoff was over 5,000 pounds. The takeoff weight was approximately 99,900 pounds according to the load sheet presented to the crew, but a recalculation by investigators produced a figure of just over 104,000 pounds, while the zero fuel weight needed to be corrected due to the weight of the luggage being less than planned. On September 12, 2019, the IACC released its final report on the crash. The most likely cause of the crash, according to the IACC, was the collapse of the aircraft as a result of its entry into abnormal positions immediately after liftoff during the takeoff, which led to the loss of control of the plane due to a chain of errors, with the predominance of the human factor. The investigation into the crash of Cubana de Aviación Flight 972 concluded that human error was the primary cause of the accident. The investigation determined that the crew failed to correctly configure the aircraft's flaps and slats for takeoff, resulting in an inability to generate enough lift to maintain flight. Furthermore, the investigation discovered deficiencies in the crew's training, as well as the aircraft's maintenance practices. According to the translations by On Cuba News and Havana Times, the contributing human factors were mostly due to the inconsistencies in the crew's training, errors in weight and balance calculations, and the low operational standards that were revealed during the flight. President Miguel Diaz-Canel, Health Minister Roberto Morales, and other local officials have arrived at the scene to observe and monitor the rescue efforts. Families and relatives of those on board gathered at the scene and were later transported to the airport. The country declared a national day of mourning from 6 a.m. on May 19th to 12 a.m. on May 20th, with flags flying at half-mast outside government and military installations. Relatives were summoned to Havana to identify the deceased, and the National Revolutionary Police escorted them to make room. Thank you for stopping by to watch. Please subscribe to the channel and post your video recommendations in the comments area if you'd like us to do more films like this.